Watches are 2 hours long, and there's not so much you can do because it's too cold to use a phone, and there's salt water washing over the bridge. You can't read because it would destroy your books in a minute. So you're basically just sitting and watching for icebergs and watching for other ships. It's a bit noisy with the wind, so you can talk, but it gets tiring because you have to talk loud. I was watching over to the sea, which is like this never-ending morphing of the surface of the ocean. The smell is that of burned diesel because there's the exhaust chimney of the heating device that just comes out there. So it smells a bit like salt and a bit like burned diesel. And you feel like swayed because the boat is rocking back and forth. So it feels very pleasant to be rocked by the waves, a bit like a baby in its bed.
Jean Hausser spent 5 years preparing for the biggest adventure of his life. He made 100 skydives to befriend the fear of heights. He spent an unreasonable amount of weekends learning to ski, as he puts it. He learned to sail. This culminated in a long sought-after expedition to the Antarctic Peninsula. But why?
The first driver is just like a lifelong dream, right? When I remember being a teenager, seeing this show on the family TV about the Shackleton expedition, and right there, like feeling what it would be amazing to experience a little bit of what those polar explorers experienced. But the other angle was really to intensify the practice of skills that allow you to function well in groups, even under pressure. Because the idea is this, is that on an expedition like this, you have a boat that's 20 meters long with 12 people, and you have to work together, right? You have to work together because the safety of the whole group depends on how the group functions together. And there's nowhere to hide, right? Because there's no privacy. You can't really, if you don't get along with someone, you can't just exclude them from your existence. You have to actually work with them. It's not like you have to go to an expedition like this to learn this, right? There's other ways to learn it, but what was special about doing it on an expedition is that the intensity of it and the fact that there was no way to escape, that is a way to, like, the intensity forces insights, right? And forces to see what works and what doesn't. I just felt it was a fundamental experience of what makes us human to function well in groups, and also a lesson that can have can translate in some aspects to the lab, because exploration is essentially like an expedition is exploration in the physical realm, right, where you put your essentially your body on the line. But in science, we do exploration in the intellectual realm, right? It's like exploring, going to the unknown, going beyond what's known, and it's essentially in science we're doing first ascents all the time, right? Trying to figure out things that nobody knows yet, or to get experiments to work that never worked before. And so I was curious about what kind of insights one can get from such experiences in the practice of doing science together.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the guide there. Wasn't it just to like follow his advice? How hard could it be?
Yeah, it was a walk in the park, really. Definitely. Started with 1 week of sailing non-stop, right, 24/7 through the Drake Passage, which is known as the stormiest waters in the world. You're doing 2-hour watches with 6 hours of break in between, during which you sleep and you eat and you recover, and then you're 2 hours on deck again, and it doesn't matter if it rains or if it snows or if it winds or if the waves are crashing on deck. You're up there to do your watch, to check if there's other ships or if there's algae in the wave, there's icebergs. So that's one aspect of it, right? Just addressing the seasickness and doing your role to keep the ship going, doing maneuvering with the sails to help the crew doing that. And then once you're in Antarctica itself, there's challenges because you go skiing on glaciers all the time, right? So then there's glaciers are these pieces of ice, right, over mountains, and the problem with them is that they're covered with snow and they have crevasses. And because there's snow over the crevasses, you don't necessarily see the crevasses. So if you don't see them, and if the snow is too weak, you might just fall into the crevasse, which might be anywhere between 50, 100 meters deep or more, right? So to address this, you rope up in team ropes, so that if somebody falls, then you have a chance to catch them. So there's skill in manages to handle your skis and go on the rope, and on the way down you ski without a rope because you rely on your momentum to go over the ski bridges. And when you ski down, you see sometimes there's a little bit of gap, all of a sudden a dark gap in the snow, and well, here we're going over the crevice edge, right? So this is not the place you want to fall. This is not the place you want to take a wrong direction with the ski. So you have to control. This is all on your responsibility at that point. So it's challenges like this, right? That we had to weather, and therefore it took these 5 years of preparation just to be proficient enough in skiing and in mountaineering in order to be a full member of the team and not a weight on the whole crew. The dream started when I was a teenager. It was this one evening. I was watching the family television with my father and my brother, and the Shackleton expedition came up, and just the tale of the adventure there was completely absorbing and fascinating to me. And I remember my father joking to me and my brother about how we should consider perhaps a career in polar exploration, which perhaps he would admit that it's not your typical fatherly typical career advice. But then the seed was planted, right? But then, over the years, what happened is the seed continued to grow, right? Into the COVID times, where I had just moved to Sweden to start the lab, and I was living in my apartment there. Had even just moved to Sweden, quite isolated, being new in town, and the pandemic was a time where it became very clear that you could not postpone your dreams to forever. Healthy people could be, suddenly they could be dead, or the borders were opening and closing, and so clearly you started to get a sense for, if you have a chance to realize a dream, maybe it's a good idea to take it, because you might not have this chance forever.
So what were some destructive patterns, as it says, Jean discovered on the boat?
There was a time where we were getting ready to start a climb, and the expedition leader, as I was tying up with two other members of the expedition on the rope team, he asked me to rope up with another rope team, one that was led by a mountain guide. And so I felt frustrated that he asked for that, because and I didn't realize why, but then I paused and I noticed the frustration, and that gave enough space to realize that I felt stung in my ego. I felt that he was devaluating my mountaineering skills. And so noticing this, it opened like a space to decide then what did I want actually, right? And so I realized that, well, he's not asking me to do anything dangerous, right? And I'm actually joining his expedition because I want him to handle the safety. For this reason, there was no reason not to follow his advice. So I did that, and in the evening I had a chance to ask why he asked me to do that, and it turns out that the reason was that he wanted the rope teams to be the same as on the day before, because he didn't want to change the teams on this day, because it turns out that climb was the most technical. So it was a chance to practice the skill of what I call self-leadership, which is to, when we sense that we're getting run by our patterns, the emotions are running high, and we're losing the sense of thinking straight and deliberate choice, this is the time where we want to pause, notice the emotion, name what's going on inside, and then that opens a space to deliberately choose the action, right?
How come you decided to write a book about this?
That's a good question. Why did I want to write a book about it? Well, actually, I wasn't planning to write a book on it at all. What happened was that I took notes every night when I was just before going to bed on my tablet. And when I came back, I had the sense of calm that I had never had, because you have to imagine that this was like 4 or 5 weeks out of the world, in the sense that we didn't have access to news, we didn't have access to messages, no social networks. We were not operating in the context of big organizations, right? Everything was happening without screens, like just voice and eye communication. everything that we would do, we would see the outcome and the positive outcome directly, right? There was no doing paperwork because of some regulations. It was all like, hey, can you help me put the Zodiac out in the water? Well, of course, because then we can go skiing. Or like, of course you're going to help clean the kitchen because then we can cook and have food tonight. So everything we were doing was pretty much aligned with the group and therefore with ourselves. There was a very strong sense of agency over what we were doing, and also a sense of agency over our thoughts because of, no bombardment of news that we seem to have no control over, and no bombardment of amazing achievements from all over the world from social media. So coming back from this, I felt a sense of calm and of clarity, and I thought it would be a pity to not store that somewhere, right? So I started to go over my notes coming back and to put them in clear writing as opposed to some crappy handwriting, and then all of a sudden I had 50 pages of well-written notes, but they only made sense to me, right? Because you had to know what had happened in order to understand the notes. And I'm like, maybe there should be a book, right? Because maybe coming back, people were asking me about the trip, and I noticed that many were curious about what the experience was like. So I'm like, maybe these 50 pages can be detailed and fleshed out and documented with pictures to make a book out of it. That can then I can use it as a capsule to come back to this experience whenever I feel the need to, and it can be a chance for others also to have a sense for what it's like to go on an experience like this. Any thoughts I want to explore, I could just explore, see where it took us. And so it's like this fantasy of complete freedom. It felt so close that you could touch it. So it invited thoughts about what was the point of life, right? Was it to have the best experiences? Was it to do meaningful work? Was it to have impact? Was it to have a good time, to make great memories? And it's something that I've often experienced whenever I'm out of the world, maybe on a hike in the mountains or on a skiing holiday. The work we do has its challenges, but the response is not to run away, right? Because there's so much meaning in it. And we need the infrastructure and we need the institution to do the work that we do. It's been an occasion to choose the word over and over again. I remind myself why I do this.